Continuing the Chronicles of Hildegoth, copyright 2017 by Stuart Staub, all rights reserved worldwide. Chapter 1. According to the edicts of the Amonic beliefs, the incarnation of the collective faith of his followers and the creator of all the other gods is known as Oman. The holy book of this greatest of gods, the Rand, dictates that he did not create Hildegoth, nor any of its peoples, but he was in fact drawn to them by the power of their goodness and faithfulness. Centuries ago, a bright burning light fell from the sky, and all who witnessed it believed it to be a god come to deliver them from the arduous times that tormented them. This, the source of Amon's original power, was set upon by the pawns of evil that wallowed in the muddy pits of other mortal souls, and a great battle, unknown of in all but the most ancient of historic texts, took place, but even then the power of good outweighed it and saw it defeated. As for Amon himself, he has power beyond comprehension, but many scholars and clerics postulate that it may not be infinite, hence the creation of the greater gods. Their origins buried in myth and in some cases lost to the tongues of the long dead, many of the greater gods were chosen from exceptional mortals, while some were created outright from matter indicative of their spheres of influence. Given a spark of his power, these gods filled their own roles as need dictated and required. Connected through their vast wara to their respective elemental divergences, they have performed their deeds for over 2,000 years. However, they have lessened greatly of late, and it may very well be that even immortals tire of toil. Long ago, stirrings had begun in vast currents of malignant energy accumulating beyond the senses of normal folk. They had coalesced in great maelstroms near Erethai, the oldest seat of civilization in Hildegoth, where the humans of this land had dwelt the longest. After so many centuries of greed, hatred, and envy, that energy began to leach back into the waking world, affecting friend and foe alike. It had been held in check for a time by the hearts and efforts of beings such as High King Merit the Good and his predecessors, but with these lodestones of motion came the inevitable bloody filings of their ken. Peace had had her brief verse on the stage, sweet, soothing, and far too short. As these energies thickened, they began to draw even more of the same vein to itself. At first it was only sparks and threads, but slowly it became a great churning vortex that assimilated anything wicked that came near. Over the ages, simple similarity became need. Need became intent. Intent eventually became mind, and its hunger was unimaginable. It reached out blindly like an infant seeking its mother, and its rancorous influence coaxed the very acts that provided its sustenance from even those of mild spite that felt its touch. For many it caused their violent wicked end. For others, it caused flashes of insight on how to spread their own terrible acts, thus releasing more of what this vile amalgam craved. And for yet others, a precious few, it would stoke old embers of sin that would engender such unquenchable guilt that the only respite from it was oblivion. Inspired by forces they could not understand, ogres took up mace and club and sword and tapped on the shoulder their surly neighbors, suggesting that they work together on their hunts. The thin ranks of the Garulls, only now beginning to fill gaps and reconnect bloodlines, ventured out on mad rampages that even their savage minds could not fathom. Their stomachs groaned with flesh to the point where they left great piles of steaming bloody meat behind them, only to kill more and more to satisfy their manic lust for death. It would pass, but a simmering drop would remain, enough to stir the creatures back up into another lunatic killing revelry, and then another, and then another. Such actions threatened their still reduced numbers, but their intrinsic survival instinct was swept aside by this madness. Simple folk watched in horror as goblins wandered down from their long shut-up dens to set fire to farms and cottages alike, only to stand stupefied amongst the flames and be consumed along with them. A child of ill temper would suddenly flare and strike like a crazed animal, ripping and tearing with his nails until they were ripped from his fingers, and biting until his teeth bent from his mouth. He would just as suddenly cease as tears of pain and confusion surrogated the inexplicable rage. An old man in a coastal town got up from his rocking chair, wandered down to the docks, and dropped into the water. He would never emerge, and good-hearted people who would attempt rescue would find his drowned, milky body nearly 100 feet from shore and 30 feet down, his hands locked in futile claws around the partially buried handle of a chest. This chest yielded no treasure but for that of a skeleton, an old business associate he had killed and buried under the sands of the ocean floor 50 years past. The good looked on in confused terror. The balance could tip either way, and even the slightly wicked would feel the tugging of something above the senses, something vile and cruel and irresistible. And acts were committed, and more acts, and more. Though not as yet consciously provoking these acts, the newly formed being whose very existence was responsible for their coalescence would look upon the works and call them good, had it been able to see them. And it would grow and learn and scheme for more in an endless lust for power and sustenance. Though there was a great shining bastion of good spiking the aether through Erethai's heart in the form of its leaders and followers of the Ammonic faith, it could not eradicate its antithesis. It could only combat it. At an Erethai in the High King's castle of Tinianet, the High King himself sits bolt upright with his hand at his chest and his breath bursting from him in hissing gasps. His hair and beard were a frantic, sweaty tangle. For the second time that turn, he had dreamt of his people clutching at his robes, only they are torn and tattered, and the people are withered ghouls bearing teeth through mouths pulled taut with desiccation. Beyond and all around him was the presence of a single malevolent horror that had no name. As he leaned forward in a bed that had yet to find a queen, he calmed and reasoned. They seemed only dreams, and he would repeat this to himself until he nearly believed it. But in his heart he knew something moved in the world beyond what he could see with his eyes. Something that had to be stopped.